Hi guys, it's really great to have a chance to have a chat. Um, we've been putting up a number of videos on our Waterloo campaign over recent a couple of recent weeks. Got a few more in the pipeline, and we've had some comments posted saying you'd be really interested in understanding how we've what campaign rules we've used. I've mentioned in the past I picked up Henry Hyde's new book on War Games campaign, and how we've applied those in the campaign. So. I'll give you a bit of an insight into that as we go forward. So in playing the campaign, we've used the movement rules from within the War Games campaign book. We've used the rules for advancing into combat and the effects of attrition when you march move, and the effects of combat and how that affects units that have fled from the table, and how to get them into encounters. And again, variants on the orders giving rules, but we haven't used the rules for sieges, and as yet haven't used the rules for random events, because that felt a level of complexity that we didn't want to try on our first campaign. And indeed, there weren't really any siege actions, or any at all, as I'm aware of, in the 1815 campaign, so that didn't feel appropriate. Another thing that we've noticed is we've had to adjust some of those rules because they feel like they're more written for early 18th century gaming in terms of the scale and pace of unit movement. So I'm picking up the game. The first thing I did was check the scaling on the map, which didn't have a geographic scale on it. So just did a little bit of research on Google Maps to work out the area of terrain the war game board represented, which is about 150 kilometres by 150 kilometres. And then we also looked at the number of villages set out on the map, because effectively we're going to use the distance between each village as a sort of movement point calculator. And pretty much the villages on the map were pretty evenly spaced up to a sort of 10 to 15 villages north-south and east-west across all the various different axes, which gave about a 10-kilometre spacing for each one of those components. In looking at Henry's rules, he had movement rates of per week, I think from memory, about 10 to 15 kilometres for infantry, 30 kilometres for cavalry, and about 60 kilometres for messengers. Now, looking at the Waterloo campaign, it was pretty apparent that units were moving much faster than that. So I simply converted that into days, so allowing each division to move 10 kilometres per day if they were infantry, 20 kilometres if they were cavalry, 40 kilometres if they were messengers. So that would be one village, two villages, or up to four villages of movement on the map. And also give the units the ability to force march, which would give them an extra a doubling of movement effectively. But if they do that, they take further attrition, as set out in Henry's rules. So for all movement, you took casualties effectively from stragglers, but if you force march, that rate increased quite substantially. So we've applied the factors in Henry's rules. It's about 2 or 3% for normal movement, and I think from memory sort of 5, 6, 7% for force movement. But again, those are varied by dice rolls, so you can end up with a slightly more benign set of results or a more negative set of results with a bit of randomization. The rules also set out what happens after combat, so in which direction you flee from combat, away from the direction of the assault, whether you flee in one direction or you scatter in multiple different directions, depending on the scale of the defeat, and effectively ascribes further losses from that resulting movement as your units disintegrate, as individuals desert. So you see much higher casualties, 20% or more, as a result of fleeing after combat. So that gives us the basic movement factors. So we've got movement rates, we've converted to the map scale, we've adjusted the timing scale by about a factor of 5, and we've got a framework for what happens after combat. So we then apply those to the table, and effectively I just use, what's the word? Inspiration, creativity, I just make it up in terms of setting out the terrain. Clearly, if there are major rivers marked on the map, I'll try and incorporate those in the table, or indeed if there are major elements of woodland, but otherwise there'll just be a fair scattering of terrain and usually the villages represented on the tabletop. And we'll then play out the game. We'll play out the game. We'll apply the losses that come out of the general Dame rules to the units. And I assume that the casualties that are identified towards getting to a unit break are straight absolute losses in a figure ratio perspective. So you don't have to wipe a unit out by taking all the casualties off. Yeah, when a unit breaks, I simply convert the casualties at a 1 to 20 ratio. So a standard infantry battalion, 36 figures, would take 12 sets of casualties, inverted commas, under the General Army rules, which I would convert at a 1 to 20 ratio as 240 casualties from that unit. I would take that off the unit totals, then apply the further factors from the campaign rules about further deterioration of that unit as it flees the table. So we'll see how that works. I don't know whether the ratios are about right. There's not a perfect formula I've come up for that, but yeah, using the casualties on the table that you record against the unit, multiplying them by the figure scaling ratio, and then applying the break results from campaign movement scenario gives me the rates I use for the units as they deteriorate in the ongoing campaign. I'll put up some shots of the orders of battle that you'll see, and you'll see the numbers of figures I had in the units as they start, and then I adjust those down for road movement, I adjust them down for forced marches, I adjust them down for casualties on the table, and I adjust them down for breaking after combat. And then there's some recovery rates in the rules as well, so there's a separate column if you look on the Excel charts for casualty recoveries as well. So you get some casualties back after 1 day, some after 3 days, some after 6 days. I think it's that sort of time frame. So we add those units back. Okay, let's have a look at some of the orders of battle. So these are pretty much the spreadsheets I use that set out all the various different units. You can see you've got unit names there, and on the left-hand column you get the original unit size. You can see I'm taking off casualties and adding back units that recover after combat. Keep a track of these, and that's how we keep track of our units. Right, and finally let's have a look at an example of the map here. So as you can see, you've got all the towns and villages marked. I don't let my units move cross country, I force them to move between the little villages on the map. As I say, each one placed about 10 kilometres apart, covering the 150 by 150 kilometre area. So an infantry division can move 1 step between 2 villages on normal movement and 2 under forced march, cavalry 2 and 4, and orders 4. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how we're playing the game, how we're doing the movement. We track where the commanders in chief are, so they have to issue orders which take time to dispatch, using those enhanced movement rates for messengers, and that will allow them to change orders and change their tasking. Very simple one-line orders for all the units is all we're using at the moment. No major contingent orders. One of the things that's really surprised me is just how much, if you're driving up the centre, you get forced into conflicts that are quite similar to those who won historically. Perhaps not a surprise, but we've certainly got combat going on at Lingy and at the approaches to Waterloo, as happened in the real campaign. So we'll see how it evolves. Do hope you keep watching the videos, and catch you all soon. Cheers.